Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for just giving us a moment to get everything running on our technology end. On behalf of Holy Blossom Temple and the Luke Sklar Mental Health Initiative, I just want to thank you for attending our program this evening. My name is Rabbi Zachary Goodman, and I have the privilege of working closely with the committee members of this incredible initiative. Our webinar this evening should last just about 90 minutes. I'd like to begin tonight by saying a word about the Luke Sklar Mental Health Initiative namesake. Luke Sklar was a loving family man and a true leader in business and a community. His care and strategic guidance helped build a better Holy Blossom Temple and enriched our congregation immeasurably. Luke's openness with his depression and determination to bring greater awareness inspired the initiative that now bears his name. Our goal is to provide education, support, and resources related to the challenges of mental health. If you would like to learn more about this initiative or our upcoming programs, please reach out to me at zgoodman@holyblossom.org. Tonight, we are engaging in learning about a particularly stigmatized mental health issue of addiction, substance abuse, and use. As the feelings of isolation intensify during this cold winter, and we have no clear end in sight of this pandemic, the necessity for this conversation grows ever more important. This evening's program was made possible by a generous gift from Jill Whitkin and Greg Coleman. We thank you for enabling our community to take part in this dialogue. Additionally, we want to highlight the work of the professionals from JACS, the Jewish Addiction Community Services. JACS is a nonprofit organization supported by the UJA and individuals from all segments of the Jewish community. For over 20 years, JACS has been on the front line of addiction and related mental health education and counseling. One part of JACS' mission is to help break the stigma associated with getting help for substance use disorders and compulsive behaviors such as alcohol, cannabis, gambling, and technology. JACS outreach programs are in schools and universities, businesses, and spiritual institutions all over the GTA and Canada as well. JACS also facilitates over 20 different support groups each week, and information for those can be found on their website. In addition, JACS offers therapy, often at no charge, to those seeking individual guidance for themselves or for a loved one. So perhaps you saw at the opening slide that for those who are inspired or who are triggered by tonight's program, there is a JACS counselor standing by right now to help. They can be reached via text or call at 647-238-3480. For more information, please contact JACS Toronto at info@JACS, that's JACS Toronto.org. Again, and that phone number for the counselor who is standing by is 647-238-3480. I'll be sure to add that in the chat function as well. So before we turn it over to Shelley to introduce our speakers, I just wanted to take a moment to offer a prayer of strength and healing. Adonai, hear our prayer. Heed our plea for your compassion. In our time of trouble, we call to you, for you will answer us. When pain and fatigue are our companions, make room in our hearts for renewed strength. When days and nights are filled with darkness, let the light of courage illumine our path. Help us to endure the suffering and dissolve our fear. Renew within us a calm spirit of trust and peace. Baruch atah Adonai, Rofei HaCholim. Praised are you, Adonai, healer of the stricken. Together we can say, Amen. So without any further ado, we say thank you again for being here. And we are going to turn it over now to Shelley Berenbaum. We invite you to our screen. Shelley, thank you so much for all the work that you, together with the Luke Sklar Mental Health Initiative members, have put into organizing this evening. Shelley, the virtual floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Rabbi. On behalf of the Luke Sklar Mental Health Committee, I want to welcome all of you this evening. We have a great program for you, and I just want to give you a bit of idea of format. As Rabbi has indicated, we're going to go until about 9:30, maybe 1 minute after. First, we will hear from Randy Eckler, a man with lived experience of addictions, also referred to as substance use disorders. That will be followed by a presentation by Dr. Leslie Buckley, Chief of Addictions at Center for Addiction and Mental Health. We'll have a brief time at the end for questions. So if you've got any questions as the speakers are speaking, feel free to put them in the chat box. You put it to all panelists. Or if you're watching through Facebook, you do your questions through Facebook. All of your questions will be posed anonymously. Okay, I am delighted to introduce Randy Eckler. Randy is from Toronto and struggled with addiction to alcohol and marijuana for over 40 years. He has been in recovery for 4 years this month, so it's a special month for him and a special year for him from marijuana, and 17 years from alcohol. And he has generously agreed to share his story with us. Randy, we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Shelley. My name is Randy Eckler. I'm an addict and an alcoholic. Firstly, before I tell my story, I would like to thank the Holy Blossom, Rabbi Goodman, the Luke Sklar Foundation, and everybody involved for including me in this evening's Zoom meeting. I think it's very, very important that we reach out to as many addicts and alcoholics as we can and families in need to prevent them traveling the same roads that I went down. So that being said, I grew up in a traditional Jewish family, North End, Toronto. There was myself and 3 older sisters. Very, very close-knit family. Life dealt me some rough cards, and I guess I didn't really react too well. I firstly discovered alcohol at 13 years old, and it made me feel real good, really, really, really good. So good, in fact, that it became a weekly occurrence, and then it escalated to a daily occurrence. It played a major part in my life. It made me feel good, and at the same time, it stopped me from feeling bad. It hid the bad places that I didn't want to go to. It was like a game of hide and seek. We all played that when we were a kid. Alcohol was my place to hide. Didn't think anything was wrong with it. Everybody drank. Back in the day, drugs were illegal. It's legal now for marijuana anyways, but drugs were illegal, and I can still remember what it was like before I did drugs. And I was so proud of myself that I was able to not do drugs. And I laughed at people that did it. Then at 16 years old, just to impress a girl, I said, well, let's just try it once. Well, that was it. The top was off the jar, and it was downhill from there. I smoked marijuana and drank alcohol for well over 40 years, almost 45 years. And it rapidly took control of my life, took control of me. And again, hide and seek gave me a great place to hide. Marijuana, more than alcohol, had a very, very bad effect on me. Anger issues. It robbed me of my get up and go, of my drive. It turned me into a couch potato. All I wanted to do 24 hours a day was smoke drugs and drink beer. What kind of a life is that? I started early, I ended late, 7 days a week. Finally, because of the effect it started to have on me, to put it quite simply, the first bag of weed I bought cost me $25. The second bag of weed I bought cost me everything I ever wanted and everybody I ever loved. They couldn't take my behaviors anymore, and who blames them? An addict, this addict spent many, many years in denial. It's only weed, it's only weed, it's only weed, it's only marijuana. I didn't do cocaine, I didn't do needles, it's only weed. Anybody that says it's only weed should be kicked in the posterior and told it's only a running shoe. It's the same effect. It's a terrible gateway drug. And for me, it cost me everything. I was married 3 times, but in reality, I never had a wife. I had 3 prisoners. All 3 of them were smart enough to escape. I can't blame any of them. When I was 17 years old, I remember my mom saying to me, Randy, the only thing I wish for you is to have a son, just like you. Well, you know what? If you would put me in a photocopy machine, it would spit out the son that I've been blessed with. He's a carbon copy of me. He's my very, very, very best friend. I love him dearly, but we were at each other's throats for years, because of the effect that alcohol and drugs had on me. Finally, 17 years ago, March 30th, 2003, I had my last drink. I'm in a union, and I went to my union representative and said, get me help. They sent me away to a residential program for 35 days. I haven't had a drink since. But in those days, the Alcoholics Anonymous program only wanted to hear about alcohol. They didn't want to hear about drugs. So that's fine. I didn't drink anymore. But then I relied heavily on my marijuana use, and more and more and more. Like I said, it cost me everything I ever had, everybody I ever loved. Marijuana and alcohol was a very bad combination for me. It turned me into a combination of Mike Tyson and Brad Pitt. I thought I was the toughest guy in the world. I could fight anybody, and I usually did. And I thought I was Brad Pitt. All the girls wanted me, so I thought. In reality, I wasn't Brad Pitt. I was more like Armpit, because I really, really wasn't doing well. My parents never saw me clean and sober in their golden years. Never. My dad was in the hospital. I went to visit him, and he looked me in the eye, and he said, I smell beer. Of course, I denied it. Same thing with my mom. She smelled weed. And of course, I denied it. Denied. That's what we addicts do. You can tell an addict is in recovery when they stop blaming everybody and they take responsibility for their own actions. Speaking about actions, like I said, I had 3 older sisters. One sister unfortunately passed away from Crohn's. One sister I haven't seen in 40 years. And another loving, caring sister hasn't spoken to me in over 10 years. And I don't blame her. I can't. Everybody's responsible for themselves. I have to be responsible for myself. I've isolated myself from my family. Like I said, it cost me 3 marriages, a lot of jobs, anything that was worthwhile. Finally, after coming to a very serious block in the relationship with my son, and he's my reason for living, I needed to do something. What was I going to do? So well, she's my ex-wife now, but she was my wife at the time. She found meetings at Jack's called Here to Help, Thursday nights. I went once or twice, and then I stopped going. And then I decided I can't do this anymore. I can't. Some of the behaviors that I did were absolutely vile and disgusting. The anger, the aggression. People would literally cross the street when they saw me coming. I remember one time, car driving in front of, beside me, put on a signal and went in my lane. I didn't want him to be in my lane. You want to talk about road rage? So I pulled up beside him and started screaming at him. He gave me the finger. Well, that made things even worse. I followed him for blocks. This is very hard to share with you, but I need to be honest. I followed him for blocks, and finally at his place of work, we got out of the cars, and I said to him, if you give me the finger one more time, I'm going to break it. He gave me the finger, and in my drunken stupor, I grabbed his finger and touched his elbow with it. I broke it in probably 3 or 4 places. These are the kind of disgusting, vile things, lack of self-control, that drugs and alcohol do. Well, at least they did to me. Every day when I wake up, I've got a conscious decision to make if I want to be a hopeless dope addict or a dopeless hope addict. Like I said, 4 years ago, I started going to Jack's Here to Help meeting. It's for families of addicts and alcoholics. The reason I went there is to get in touch with the collateral damage of my own addictions. When I see these broken families and partners and spouses and sons and daughters, it puts me in touch of the people I've hurt and what I've done. It's not a very good feeling. But I call that a gift exchange because well, it's not in person anymore, it's on Zoom. I share my story with them. They share their story with me. By speaking with me, they learn how to deal with addicts. And by me speaking with them, I keep in touch with the collateral damage of my addiction and my alcohol. November 28th, 4 years ago, I decided to give my son a birthday present. It was his 22nd birthday. And I wanted to give him a clean father and ask him for his forgiveness. That was my gift to my son. I owed him that much and a lot more. About 2 years ago on Facebook, I got a message from a man that's become a friend. His name is Bob. And he said, can we talk? He's somebody I went to school with from public school. And I said, sure, what do you want to talk about? I didn't remember any of this because I was in a very, very drug-induced coma for 40 years. He said, I used to hate you. Every day you would beat me up. I was afraid to go to school. And his concern after telling me that was that I'm going to show up at his door and do it again. I begged him to forgive me. That man has now become one of my closest and dearest friends. And Bob, I know you're watching this. I love you, buddy. That man has gotten me involved in the Out of the Cold program, serving dinner to 150 homeless people. Again, that's on hold because of COVID. But it's just a new way of life. I've discovered spirituality. I've discovered I took Hebrew lessons in the last year. I'm now in communication with not one, not two, 3 rabbis on a regular basis. It's absolutely unbelievable. I have a home group. It's called BYOB, Bring Your Own Book. We meet Tuesday nights. I couldn't have done this without them. We definitely went from feeling good to not feeling at all. And the difference being in recovery with that game of hide and seek that I was talking about. Imagine, if you will, somebody counting and you're going to hide. Well, now my hiding place is gone. I don't have the weed anymore. I don't have the alcohol anymore. But you know what I do have? Respect. The hardest respect I've ever had to earn is my own. The other people on this panel, when I was growing up, they would be so far out of my league, I wouldn't even be able to talk to them. But now I feel like I belong in any group of people. I'm a human being. I work with other addicts. I work with other families. People actually want to talk to me. They ask me to help their children. They ask me to help their partner. I go to a men's meeting for different addictions, also from Jack's. Every day, like I said, I have a choice. Do I want to be a hopeless dope addict, or a dopeless hope addict? I choose to be a dopeless hope addict. Nobody can take hope from me ever again, unless I choose to give it to them. I'm in the process of I'm in a 12-step program. The first step being I'm powerless over drugs and alcohol, and my life had become unmanageable. I'm not ashamed anymore of being an addict and an alcoholic. Anybody that'll listen, I'll tell them I'm an addict and I'm an alcoholic. When about a year and a half ago, on the Facebook dating site, I met a girl. And we went out for dinner. Something told me, it had to be a message from God, because something told me to tell her my story. And in half an hour, 20 minutes, I told her everything. And you know what this lady said to me? When's the last time you had a drink? I told her 17 years. When's the last time you touched drugs? I said 3 years. She said, I don't want to be a part of your past. I want to be a part of your future. I've seen her almost every night since. We're deeply involved in a loving, caring, romantic relationship. She's introduced me to her 2 children, to her 7 grandchildren, and she is my partner. Something I've never, ever had. She actually cares. And every day that I wake up, like I told you, I only have a son, but I'm trying to be the man that I would like my daughter to bring home if I had a daughter. The self-respect that I've earned gives me the ability, gives me the strength to help other families. One of the first things I learned in recovery is that anything I put before my recovery, I'll lose. So I can't put this relationship before my recovery, or my job, or anybody I care about. My recovery has to come first, because as long as I work on my recovery, then I'll treat everybody the way that they deserve, and I will exude confidence, politeness, manners. I'll be a gentleman. I work in heavy construction projects in downtown Toronto. And right now I'm at the corner of Richmond and Victoria doing a condominium tower. Every morning at 6 o'clock, I walk into the job site. And right outside the door, laying on a grate, is a homeless guy sleeping. It breaks my heart. He's laying there sleeping, and the birds are landing on him. And all I could think is, there but for the grace of God go I. I was so close to losing it all, and I still could, because I'm only an arm's length away from a relapse. Anybody can have a relapse. if I really, really want my recovery, which I really, truly, truly do, then first I have to give it away. And there's nothing so satisfying as when a parent asks me, I'm just an addict, but they ask me to help their child. They ask me to help their husband or their wife or their brother or their sister. We're in recovery. We are all in this together. Some addicts, they don't want to talk to their parents. They don't want to talk to their partner. They don't want to talk to a professional or a counselor or a doctor, but they'll talk to another addict because they know they've been there. And that's why I decided to put myself out there. If any of you or anybody you love has addiction problems, you can get a hold of me through Jack's. And I would be more than happy to meet with anybody, to talk with anybody. By sharing my story, I'm hoping to keep some families together. I'm hoping to keep some addicts clean. I'm hoping to make a difference. I'm hoping to give back some of what I've taken from society. It's not easy to look in the mirror and hate yourself so much for so many years. But every day clean, my worst day clean, is better than my best day on drugs. It's a guilt. I have good days, I have bad days. Because it's like the story of Rip Van Winkle, the child's fairy tale, where the guy went to sleep for 30 years and then he woke up and he missed 30 years of his life. Well, I'm a living Rip Van Winkle. I slept for 42 years. Then I woke up. By the time I woke up, I'd been divorced 3 times, bought and lost so many houses, lost jobs. People that don't know my past, that have met me over the last 4 years, they respect me because they don't know the bad things that I've done, the bad things that I'm capable of. They ask questions, they talk to me, they respect me. I'm well respected in my field by people that don't know where I've come from. I hope with all my heart and soul that God gives me enough time on earth to make amends to all of those that I desperately need to, that I owe amends to. Both of my living sisters were invited to this Zoom meeting tonight. I don't know if they're here or not, but I hope they are. Let them find out. I can't give a reason for the things that I've done. Drugs and alcohol aren't a reason. Nobody put a gun to my head and said, do these drugs. It was a choice, the same way that I have a choice to stay clean. It's only a 24-hour at a time program, a 1 day at a time. There's no guarantee that I'm going to wake up tomorrow. So I ask God every day, just let me stay clean until midnight. Give me one more day. One more day. And I can only hope that 1 day at a time, I'll be able to add it up to a week, to a month, to a year, but 1 day at a time. And I make a difference in my life, in my lady's life, Nancy's life, and her 2 amazing children, her grandchildren. Nancy's a widow. She lost her husband. Her children lost their father. Her grandchildren lost their Zeta. And I had no family. But me. Now, me and this amazing family, we fill a huge hole in each other's life. Now I know what it's like to have a family. I had an amazing family, but I didn't know how to treat them. I treated them terribly. When I spend time with those kids and they're all over me, I start to cry. I now know what it's like to be loved. Yesterday, Nancy and I went to the cemetery. We went to visit her husband, and I made him a promise that I'm going to take care of his wife, his children, and his grandchildren. And you know what? I can do that now because I'm clean. If I would have known that recovery was this good, I would have done it years ago. I spent too much time saying, it's only weed, it's only weed. I don't need help, I'm not addicted. I've been clean for a month, I've been clean for a week, and then I'd go right back out there. If this sounds like you can't do it alone. None of us can. Reach out. Before you pick up the phone to call your dealer, pick up the phone to call me, or call somebody at Jack's, or somebody at the Holy Blossom. Everybody will help. This is a group effort. Everybody will help. We can't do this alone. But before you wind up like me, 42 years later, discover recovery at 20, 25. You have your whole life ahead of you, but it's never too late. Even if you fail the first time, it's not how many times you fall down, it's how many times you get up. You can do this. You can. Thank you for your time. And I hope you got something from this.
Thank you so much, Randy. Thank you for your candor and for your sharing with us and for your offer of help. You're a model to us all. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Leslie Buckley, who I think is going to provide us with a bit of a framework of addiction. Dr. Leslie Buckley is a psychiatrist, chief of addictions at CAMH, and assistant professor at the University of Toronto. She also has her Master of Public Health from Harvard University. Dr. Buckley focuses on outpatient treatment of individuals with substance use disorders and has a keen interest in improving models of care, advocacy, substance use prevention, and women's health. Dr. Buckley lives in Toronto with her husband and 2 sons who all love basketball. Take it away, Leslie.
Thank you so much, Shelley. And thank you so much for inviting me to speak here tonight. I'm not completely new to Holy Blossom because I have been to 3 fabulous bat mitzvahs. And it's wonderful to be able to see the inside of such a wonderful community. You know, you called me Dr. Buckley in the intro, which is so nice, but you know, tonight I'm just another, you know, North Toronto member of the community who's here to speak with you. So please, you know, if anybody wants to put a question in, please just call me Leslie. What a talk, Randy. That was so touching and wonderful. And really, I think, you know, what's so fabulous about hearing someone's story and hearing your story was, you know, just that hope, you know, and really showing somebody how much things can change. So I really thank you for sharing that. And, you know, it takes a lot of bravery to come out and talk about our personal lives. So thank you so much for that. Let's share my screen here. Shelley, maybe you can just let me know if that's working.
Yes, it's working.
Super. Okay, great. So the topic of the talk today is thinking about substance use, really what every person needs to know. And, you know, living in the society we live in today where substances are so prevalent, you know, I really think it's important that everybody, you know, has an understanding of substances. And certainly, you know, I think it would be probably hard to, you know, find a person who didn't have a family member or a good friend who struggled with substances at some point, if not themselves. So we're going to talk a little bit about substances in the brain, so how the brain is impacted by substances. We're going to focus a little bit on alcohol and cannabis, mainly, but I'm going to mention some other substances, and I certainly welcome questions from the group at the end about other substances, but I thought that to focus on the more common substances would be a good idea. And then I'm going to talk about how to get help for yourself or a loved one. So let's get started. So let's start with some numbers. You can see here that we have substances, and then we have percentages of people that are using the various substances. So for alcohol, probably no surprise, 78.2% of people will use alcohol in a given year. And what might be a bit more of a surprise is that 25% of the population might be what is considered a heavy drinker. So that's somebody who's sort of exceeding the recommended guidelines, which I will talk about in terms of numbers, within a year. And then I highlight here this age group, 20 to 24, that I think I'm the most worried about right now. So 40% of them are drinking in a way that would have them classified as a heavy drinker. And you can compare that to cigarettes, which is 15.1%, which has steadily been going down since the 70s. And cannabis, which is at 14.8%. And then again, I highlight this 20 to 24 age group, where it would be 33.2%. And then other substances at about 3.3%. So sticking with this theme of numbers, how do you know when you might be drinking too much? So according to Canada, this is a quiz for you. According to Canada's low risk drinking guidelines, this many drinks are allowed for females per day and males per day. So the first number is for females and the second for males. So do you think it's 1 for females and 2 for males, or 2 and 3, or 3 and 4, or 4 and 5? So the answer is 2. So generally a max of 2 for women and a max of 3 for men per day. And then they also put a weekly amount. So for women, they're suggesting that you not exceed 10 drinks per week, and for men, 15. Now, the guidelines are, not perfect. They're a little bit controversial, because people from the cancer world would say to us, there is no safe drinking amount, because every incremental increase in the amount that you drink increases your risk of various cancers, and that is true. And I think these numbers are really more directed at difficulties with substance use, trying to factor in health as well. And in the next year, we're going to actually be revisiting these numbers. But I do really like the low risk drinking guidelines, because it helps me when I'm meeting with people and talking to them about their drinking, to give it a little bit of an idea of what Canada has sort of set as an amount that could be unhealthy. Some people are working or living in an environment where there's a lot of drinking. And I think it's helpful to have some grounding in terms of what numbers are suggested. So this next question, this percentage of Canadians are drinking above low risk guidelines. So I'll let you look at that, make your decision. And the answer is 20 to 30%. So generally, there are some varied results, but around 25% of people in a given year are exceeding the guidelines. So here we are, just repeating that information there again for you to see. They also suggest having a non-drinking day every week, just to avoid creating habits for yourself. And it's important to also think about, what is a drink? So, these are the amounts, the number of ounces in a beer, the number of ounces in a glass of wine that constitute what we consider a drink. But sometimes things can get tricky. So you can see here how one standard drink is a 5-ounce glass of wine, but at your favorite restaurant, you might be offered a 6-ounce or a 9-ounce glass of wine. And of course, if you're having the 9-ounce glass of wine, that could be 2 glasses. So it's important to realize that, sometimes you're getting more than one drink when you're getting a beverage. And what's a binge? So a binge is drinking a certain number of drinks. For women, it's 4. So anything that's over 3 is considered a binge. And for men, it should be no more than 4. So if you're drinking 4 for a woman or 5 for a man, then you're sort of exceeding the recommendations, and that would be what we consider a binge. And of course, again, this I do worry about this younger age group, 20 to 24, and this is American data, but it's just saying 7 out of 10 students are experiencing binges. And that's, you know, where a substantial part of the harm from alcohol can happen from this group, even though they might not be drinking so many drinks a week, and they might not actually have a dependence or what they would consider an alcohol problem. But that's where a lot of the accidents happen, or even, you know, violence and assaults. So let's look at grade 12s in Ontario. This is from CAMH's study of high school students and what they're drinking. So 66% of grade 12s are drinking alcohol, and 28.2% are, you know, drinking to a point that you would classify it as a binge. Cannabis is fairly high, so 40%, and that's gone up in the last few years. And the number I really didn't like was that 5% are smoking daily. So that's, you know, somebody who still has a lot of growing going on in their brain, and, you know, they're certainly, we all know that that daily cannabis can affect IQ, and certainly is not healthy in a grade 12. Cocaine and stimulants, somewhat high as well, you know, 5.2% and 5.0%. So that's, you know, certainly that's 1 in 20 grade 12 students. I think that's too high. And opioids, also very high. So this would be like non-medical use of painkiller medications, such as, you know, it could be something like Percocets or oxycodone. And we always remind adults to be very careful with pain medications that they may have in the house when they have teenagers. And then e-cigarettes, unfortunately, as you probably know, are skyrocketing. So I think from 2017 to 2019, the percentage of high school students using e-cigarettes doubled, which is really high. So let's talk a little bit about triggers for increasing alcohol use. So this cartoon, the girl is saying, "Gee, Tommy, I'd be lost without your constant peer pressure." So we tend to think of peer pressure as something, you know, that's very obvious when someone wants another person to be using a substance. But actually, peer pressure can be much more subtle. So sometimes it can be about just somebody wanting to be a part of the group. And it can also be about decreasing social anxiety. You know, in Randy's talk, he mentioned, you know, I think he started cannabis when he wanted to impress a girl. So that's a really good example, I think, of how sometimes relationships or friendships move people in a way that can cause them harm. Unemployment or work stress, right? So we've certainly learned this during the pandemic, that when people experience a change in their work, whether it's losing their job or being laid off, that creates a big vacuum for some people. It also can be very disturbing to their life if they've lost a job that really either organized their sense of self, took up a lot of time. All of a sudden, to have a lot of time on your hands and maybe also be mourning a loss of a job is very difficult. So that's a time to be really careful. And relationship problems. So sometimes in the midst of a relationship that's difficult, somebody might start using alcohol to kind of drown out the difficulty or the anxiety or the anger or the problems, and just sort of turning it off with alcohol. Also, relationships can increase alcohol when one partner comes into the relationship maybe as a regular drinker, and the other person maybe is inexperienced with alcohol, but over time, anyone who's in a serious relationship knows that sometimes you pick up habits from each other. So that's another point where somebody who hasn't had a lot of alcohol in their history might change when they get together with someone who is a heavy drinker. Trauma. So this is probably, you know, something that's under-recognized, is the impact of trauma on someone's drinking. So trauma, you know, affects lives in so many ways, and one of those ways is making us more vulnerable to substance problems. And this one, you know, what's a presentation without a cute cat? So this Kat has clearly, overdone it and is fallen asleep there. And the reason I put in this slide is just to talk a little bit about sleep. And, having seen probably 1,000 people or more during my time, it still amazes me how many people have developed their alcohol issue because of a difficulty with sleep. So, it may start out that someone has a drink of alcohol, after dinner, and it helps them maybe to relax and, stop that constant thinking that's going on before bed, the worrying, and it makes it a little easier to fall asleep. And of course, over time, if that becomes a habit, one drink turns into 2, turns into 3, turns into a full bottle of wine, and then it's sort of become its own issue. So it's really important to, to seek help for sleep through a doctor, because there's a lot of medications that, can be much more helpful. One of the tricky things about sleep that a lot of people don't realize is that if you have a little bit of alcohol, let's say you have 2 drinks, alcohol is a sedative, so it will put you to sleep, but it won't last very long because your body clears alcohol out, fairly quickly. So within a couple of hours, there's no alcohol. And then a couple of hours later, there actually might be a bit of a reverse, and you might have a little bit of an arousal. So, and that might wake you up. So, although people sometimes associate and think that alcohol helps with sleep, actually, it really hurts sleep. So somebody who's having sleep problems might want to reduce their alcohol. And then genetic influence. So, researchers have done a lot of work to find the genetic influence. And right now, generally, people feel like there's about a 50% of the risk of developing a substance use issue is genetic, and 50% is their social environment. And that carries over from substance to substance. That carries over. So if there's a family member who had, let's say, an alcohol issue, that means that you would be at increased risk for any substance. So it doesn't, stick from substance to substance. You might hear that sound. That's my dog. She just came down here. Of course, the house was perfectly quiet for the first half hour when I wasn't speaking. This slide is about boredom. So this little guy's clearly bored. This is a new slide I added recently since COVID, because one of the studies that came out that talked about factors that people thought were the most impactful on their increased drinking during COVID. For men, the number one was bored. And, I hadn't really identified that so much with people that I treated over time, but clearly that's an important factor. And then, of course, stress. So there's COVID-19 right there. We all know that it's increasing our stress. And in that same study that found that boredom was the most important factor for men in terms of increasing their drinking, for women, it was stress. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the definition of addiction. So what is addiction? It's a neurobiological disorder involving compulsive drug seeking and drug taking despite adverse consequences with loss of control over drug use. So notice all of the C's there. What are we really talking about? So we're talking about compulsion. So that need to use the substance, whether it's alcohol, cannabis, or other. And, it's also just the idea of it. So the problem, that occurs is that it just keeps coming up as an idea and an urge, and then eventually a compulsion. And then consequences. So when people are trying to, figure out if they have a problem or not, and they're thinking about consequences, sometimes they may not be aware of some of the consequences, or they might blame other things, that it's really something else. It's my bad boss that's causing my problems at work. So it's really important, to help somebody maybe see the consequences that they're not seeing, that might be impacting their life. And then control. So control is really that ability to make decisions and be able to stop behaviors that you want to stop. So we all understand the lack of control with something like chips, right? It's hard to have one chip. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about that ability to just kind of hold back on something. And then the fourth C here is the word chronic. So a chronic disorder with relapsing course. Sometimes no relapses, but sometimes there are relapses. And it's important to be prepared for that too. So what's actually happening in the brain? Really over the last 30 years, there's been so many important milestones, and really it's been quite an explosion of knowledge. So we do understand a lot now. One of the first things that was discovered was that every substance comes into the brain and it has its own unique receptor. So cannabis has its own receptor, alcohol has its own receptor, cocaine does its own unique thing, and opioids have their own receptor as well. And when the substance is always there, so it's always present in the brain, those receptors begin to downregulate. So it takes more to get them to fire. And that's why we see tolerance. So tolerance is, the number of drinks it might take you to feel intoxicated increases over time when you're drinking regularly. And that's because your brain's adapting. And then of course, when you stop, that substance has been there and the receptor is downregulated. When you stop, then you get the reverse. And then all of a sudden, instead of sedation that you get from alcohol, you're getting excitatory effects, being overstimulated. You're feeling anxious, you can't sleep. So that was important, but even more important than that was the next finding, which was the reward pathway. So the reward pathway, if you can look at this diagram here, I wish I had a pointer, but if you see that blue arrow there, that is pointing at this green thing that says NAC. And the NAC is your nucleus accumbens, and it's about the size of a pea, and it's really just in the center of your brain, in that old part that was shared with reptiles. So it's really, been there for a long time, and it's responsible for all the pleasure that we feel. So whether it's a good laugh with friends, sexual relations, a delicious meal, anything that gives you pleasure is really your reward pathway firing. And your reward pathway fires, the nucleus accumbens is stimulated, and you feel pleasure. So when some substances come into the brain, they all go to their unique receptor, but they all have this final pathway that makes them a substance of abuse. And that's this reward pathway. So they trigger the reward pathway to fire, and it fires. And of course, pleasure is there, but it's not just normal pleasure. It's usually pleasure, that exceeds something that you could really experience in life. So in a way, it's hijacking our natural reward system. And so as it's firing over and over again, just like the other receptors, those pleasure receptors start to adapt. And so it takes more to get them to fire. And when the substance is no longer there, the person feels depleted and not very good. So really the opposite of having a reward. The other thing that happens is that there's so much focus on this substance because it's really the only reliable way at a certain point to get that reward pathway to fire. They start to ignore all the other important things in their life that they once enjoyed. So whether it's family members or activities that they enjoyed or their, things that they thought were beautiful, they just don't bring pleasure anymore. So that reward pathway really becomes altered. And at the same time, so you've got this altered reward pathway, only substances are really providing pleasure anymore. And at the same time, when that nucleus accumbens fires, there's learning and incentive that happens. So the substance, because it's causing the reward pathway to fire, becomes very salient and important. Just like I'm a coffee lover, I can see a Starbucks sign, 3 blocks away. It's very salient and important to me. And that's based on all the coffee rewards I've had. So you've got the reward, you've got all that learning, which is attachment and salience. And then on top of that, there's one more component, which is the red part of the diagram. So that's your prefrontal cortex. That's really your CEO. And it's the part, of your brain that makes decisions. So it can tell you what to do, what not to do. So the process of having substances in the brain also affects your CEO and makes it work less well. So you've got a not very good functioning CEO. You've got all this attachment to the substance that's been making your reward pathway fire. So you can understand, when you think about all of those things happening at once in the brain, you can see how it can be quite a trap and really difficult to get out of. So the neurobiology really tells us that addiction is a disorder of the motivational system, and it's reward-seeking behavior that gets out of control. And I love this chart because it talks a little bit about the progression with alcohol. And, everybody can think about where they are on this continuum. So to the far left, that's the beginning of substance use. So the first time you have an intoxication with alcohol, you may feel euphoria. And that age is different for everybody, but on average, it's about 13 and a half. That's actually, when Randy had his first drink too. And, you might feel very good. And then when you're not drinking, you don't really feel all that bad, maybe a little bit of reduced energy. And the thing that's sort of like left with you, the residue is like, gosh, maybe it would be fun to do that again. So that routine goes on. It could happen, maybe every weekend for a period of time in a young person's life. And then it becomes more regular. And when it becomes more regular, maybe 2 or 3 times a week, there might be some transformation that happens in the way you experience alcohol. It maybe doesn't make you feel euphoric anymore. It makes you feel good. And, when you're not drinking, you might have a little bit of reduced excitement. And you might be desiring the substance. So you might be drinking a little bit every day, not really recognizing that it's a problem, doesn't really make you feel that great, but without it, you're maybe starting to miss it a little bit. And then again, that progresses as you move to the right. And then eventually you get to the other end of the spectrum where, unfortunately, alcohol, becomes something used to escape dysphoria. So dysphoria is like an uncomfortable feeling, could be anxiety or just sadness or, just like an emptiness. So alcohol comes in to get rid of that feeling. And without it, really, it's, a very uncomfortable feeling. And that's where the point where the thoughts of substances may become obsessions and always planning to think about where the next drink is going to come from. In terms of what's happening with COVID, a couple of studies have come out. One said that a quarter of people who are 35 to 54 are drinking more since the beginning of COVID. Another one said that 21% of 18 to 35-year-olds are drinking more. And again, I mentioned what some of those stressors were. The boredom and stress as the biggest for males and females. And then the lack of the regular schedule, which is so important. It's really shown us during this time how important it is for us to have structure to some degree as human beings. I think we like knowing, having routines, and maybe we feel actually a little bit uncomfortable when we don't have that. So COVID was a little bit of a perfect storm for drinking, and we're really seeing that at CAMH. People who maybe were drinking a little bit heavily, and then, really right when COVID started, seeing an escalation in their alcohol. So the stress, financial issues, the interpersonal challenges of lockdown, unemployment, loss of structure, and then that blurring of the weekend, weekday. So, if you're working at home, when does the day end? What's, if you're not working, what's a weekend? What's not a weekend? So it's really important, is to create your own structure and to create your own times when you're not thinking or using substances. So what's the right treatment for the right person? So this is one of those typical iceberg charts, but it's on its side. And at the widest part on the left, that's where there's no problem with alcohol. So that's really, a large amount of the area of this diagram. And at that stage, really, it's just primary prevention. So it's just a little bit of what we talked about already tonight, just knowledge, being careful, things like the lowest drinking guidelines. And then, when there's a mild issue, numbers are exceeding the lowest drinking guidelines, that's where a brief intervention can be extremely helpful. So brief intervention is just a one-time thing, and it can be a discussion, could be with your family physician, where somebody just makes a recommendation for you that says, you may not realize it, but your numbers are a little bit high. And just so it increases your risk for high blood pressure, for liver problems, diabetes, and, it might be better for you to reduce. And then things move along to the more moderate or even substantial or severe. And then it's a different level of treatment that's needed, a more specialized treatment. And then of course, down at this end, where we're at the severe point, that's where we see the most harm, where people really can lose so much of their life and really be in despair, and can lose their life. So alcohol can be a very dangerous substance. So what are some of the things that get in the way of reaching out for help? This is something to think about for yourself, right? So one of the things I always say is that we should be thinking about our drinking just like we think about our nutrition. Just always, just be curious and kind of mindful. Or you might see it in other people that you know or people that you're worried about. So one is, I've got this. So that's the idea that, sure, I may be drinking a little bit more right now because this is stressful or that's stressful, or I'm going through this, but I know I can go, I know I can go back to the way I was drinking, and I can cut this down. But it's a lot harder, it's a lot easier to say that you can than to do it. It's really hard to reduce. Second hurdle is I'm just self-medicating. So this is when someone says, I don't think I have an alcohol problem. I wouldn't be drinking if I didn't have this depression or this anxiety. And so, what we really try to help that person see is that really it's two separate things. So there really may be that depression and anxiety, and maybe that's always been there. But really we have to separate them, because drinking can become its own problem. And drinking really can escalate anxiety and escalate depression as well. So we know it's not helping, and we want people to be kind of aware, that the alcohol could be getting worse over time, and then really become its own issue, completely aside from the mood issue. Another common hurdle is I'll just go back to drinking socially. So this is for the person who may be over drinking, but thinks like, okay, maybe it's gone really far, but they really just think it shouldn't be too hard, because I used to do it. Shouldn't be so hard to just go back to drinking socially, and maybe kicking the can a bit and saying, I'm going to do it, in a few months, or I'm going to do it after the summer. And then another hurdle can be just frank denial and impulsive relapses. So somebody who says, well, sure, I've been getting in a lot of trouble, and I know I've got a problem here, but I don't really need help, because I'm just going to stop. And I stopped for a week last month and it worked. I know I can do this. And then having another relapse and maybe having some harm come from that, but still just not able to make that leap to reach out for treatment. Still always thinking, I always think of that person as like just the ultra overly independent person who maybe overvalues what they can do and doesn't realize the help you can get when you reach out and learn tips and tools and get that personal support. One of the things that we see, or I see when people come in to see me, is overvaluing alcohol. So sometimes people will wish that alcohol wasn't a problem, or say like, can you take away the problems with alcohol, the people that are bothering me about it, the liver problems I have, but really still loving alcohol. And it might take a little bit of time to help that person shift to seeing things a bit differently. That maybe really, maybe alcohol is a negative thing. It may feel like such a positive thing, and there's like such a strong attachment to it, but a lot of the work with that person is going to be helping them see alcohol as a harm. And then people who just have trouble getting it. So wondering why people around them are so worried, or finding it unpleasant that they're intoxicated. So, someone who might say like, I'm not sure why my wife is upset with my drinking, with being intoxicated. I feel like I'm even more myself when I'm drinking. If she loves me, wouldn't she want more of me? So just not seeing, and this is true for cannabis too, not seeing really the impact that it has on your personality and the way you interact with others and the way that you're experienced by others. And then a third one is daily drinking. So this is one I see all the time. This is when someone's been drinking heavily every day and is really, like caught up. They're in the hardest part of addiction, and they just may not even, they may recognize they have a problem, but they just don't feel like they can do anything about it, because the alcohol is just draining them of hope, draining them of their confidence, and they just feel like they can't do it, and just not going to try. And it's amazing when you get to work with someone like this, and it's hard for them to just decide overnight they're going to stop forever. So sometimes we'll work on a plan of like, let's just try a week. Let's see how you feel. Maybe you owe it to yourself to just see what it would be like if you weren't drinking, and then make your decision on whether you want to stop or not. And it's in a week, things can change a lot. And that same person who really felt like they couldn't do it and felt quite hopeless about it can all of a sudden really see things quite differently and feel they're ready for treatment. So tips for reducing: watch the numbers. Try to make sure you have days with no alcohol. Try not to pair alcohol with regular activities like watching TV. So sometimes, and this is, I think especially relevant during COVID, people might be having a drink and they can't do anything else. So they might be watching TV or, playing on the internet. And then all of a sudden, you might be pairing that activity. So in the future, when you try to cut down your alcohol, it might be hard to watch TV or be on the internet without alcohol. So, maybe restricting to certain activities, dinner or something would be better than sort of getting used to your regular activities involving consumption of alcohol. Avoid daytime drinking. Alternate alcohol with non-alcoholic beverages. And this is one I really especially like for young people or for people who are really working hard to cut down, and it's really hard at a social event. It just turns into a habit to reach out for that next drink. And before you know it, you've had too many. So encouraging people to just, sometimes it's slow down and drink your drink slowly, but for some people that doesn't work. And so it's like, okay, drink your drink, but then get a Diet Coke or a soda water. Switch to a less potent type of alcohol. So we're often encouraging someone to go from liquor to wine to beer, just going down that route, and switching to a type of alcohol you like less, even though it might not be pleasant. If you like red wine, then maybe switch to white wine and you might drink less. Other tips for reducing: have a drinking plan. And again, this is important. You can think about where you're going, the amount that you want to have. So let's say it's a work event and you don't want to have more than 2 drinks at your work event. So you just think, okay, I'm, plan it out in advance. I'm not going to have more than 2. I'm, going to leave this much time between them, and be quite careful about what you're going to consume. You might want to limit some time with people who you drink heavily with. So it could be people who drink heavily themselves. They just might be people that are triggers for you. And then starting later in the night. If you can put off starting, then you're just probably going to have less time to actually consume and consume less. And then no shooters. So again, this is for young people and all young people, really. Like I would love to have this conversation with all young people about going out to party or club, just to think about alternating drinks, having a less potent alcohol, not having shooters, and then going home. So whether you're at a social event where you're not having a good time, or even let's say a wedding that's maybe a little bit emotionally challenging because sometimes, there's a lot of family members there, or there might be some interpersonal things going on. Sometimes that's when people kind of reach for a little bit more alcohol than they usually would. But, you can always go home. And it's sometimes we forget that. And again, when I think about young people, I think about, they don't always realize that, and just how important it is to know that you can exit at any time if you're uncomfortable. Okay. The next, so I'm going to shift gears now. So that was about alcohol. One of the things about talking about reducing, I don't want to give the impression, that we encourage reducing in everybody. Sometimes people are, if there's moderate to severe drinking issues, sometimes people might try reducing and it just doesn't work. So reducing doesn't work for everybody. And sometimes somebody has to, shift gears and decide not to drink at all. And one message for everybody is it's really important to be an ally, of people who are trying to control their drinking. So that could involve, not encouraging drinking ever, right? So somebody says no, they don't want to have a drink, then sometimes people will say, oh, come on, have a drink. So if you want to be an ally, then that's not something that you want to do. And then if somebody that is has informed you that they have a substance issue, you could always ask them if they've had that discussion with you, so you don't want to presume what their choices are. But you might want to ask them, if they would prefer you not drink with them. And sometimes people say, no, go ahead. I don't want to affect anyone else, but please, other times they might not want you to drink. And now I'm just going to shift gears to talk about cannabis. And I'm going to start with a statement, and maybe it's an understatement. But cannabis is complicated. So, it was illegal, now it's legal. It's good. Some people say it's good for you. Some people say it's bad for you. Mixed messages everywhere. There's different types, but really, what does it do? And in the end, it does very different things for different people. And on this slide, actually, there's supposed to be the molecular diagram of THC. So talking about the components of cannabis, there's really many, many different parts, but one of them is THC. And that's classically the component of cannabis that makes somebody high. So that's where you get the euphoria. But you've probably also heard about CBD, and I'm sure you know people who are taking CBD for their pain. So CBD is also a component of cannabis, but it doesn't necessarily bring much of a euphoria. So it may be psychoactive, like we really are trying to learn what CBD does. So it may do something, but we're not necessarily seeing it lead to dependence and addiction. So the part that we're worried about is the THC. And down at the bottom of this slide, you can see how the quantity of THC to CBD has changed over time. So in 1975, typically marijuana that you would find would have about 3% THC and 3% CBD. Some people also believe CBD may counteract THC to some degree and be protective against anxiety or psychosis. But now, look in 2017, you can see THC can be as high as 25 to 35%, excessively high, and CBD is almost zero. So, what's the reason for that? I think it's because people don't want that protective component of CBD, and they want that euphoric, positive feeling. Oh, there's our molecules. Okay, and this next slide is really talking about perceived harm and how that has a relationship with the likelihood of somebody using that substance. So this goes back to 1975 when the perceived risk, which is in red, was low. You can see almost a perfect correlation, that goes the opposite direction, that past year use of marijuana was higher. So what we, can take from this graph is that when perceived risk of harm is high, then, less people will use the substance. So that's another area that's been really complicated with cannabis, right? So 2 years ago it became legal, and that, there are many reasons why that's very positive, but, it might decrease the perceived risk of the substance, and medical marijuana, which can be, very helpful for a certain number of illnesses. But, just having that word, medical marijuana, as a treatment might make people think that, there's a less perceived risk. And then, of course, there's, an impact of lifestyle and advertisement that you can see from on occasion that kind of gives a positive view of the cannabis lifestyle. And Seth Rogen, who, recently did a public health commercial for BC and said, don't go out, smoke weed. And, I heard him also talking about, how he's trying to come out of his own stigma of smoking marijuana every day, and how, that was hard for him. And now he's saying it hasn't really affected him. And, celebrity power is very large. And I'm glad it's not affecting his life, but certainly affects a lot of people's lives, like Randy. And so I think I'm not so comfortable with that public health message. So what does cannabis do? There's definitely a clear dependence. So, if somebody says that you can't get addicted to cannabis, that's not true. There's a clear dependence, and there's a withdrawal. And the withdrawal is different for everybody. So some people don't have so much of a withdrawal, and some people have a very substantial withdrawal. And one of the interesting things is, how that affects mood and a gender difference. So for women, the same amount of cannabis can really make them feel more intoxicated. And also, when they stop cannabis, they have a quicker mood drop than men do. It's an important difference. But men smoke a lot more cannabis than women. So that's the thing for men to look out for. The effects of use: cognitive impairment, psychomotor impairment, conjunctival injection, that's the reddening of the eyes, and severe anxiety. With withdrawal and euphoria and the other experiences that people see as positive. And then in withdrawal, this is I think a piece that's not so well known. It's very hard. Irritability, decreased appetite, sometimes severe nausea, weight loss, restlessness, insomnia. Sometimes insomnia is the hardest part of getting through stopping cannabis. Depressed mood, abdominal pain, and sweating. And withdrawal peaks at 4 to 7 days. And as I said, some people don't have so much withdrawal. Some people have really, really tough withdrawal. In terms of whether it's helpful or harmful, for other mental health issues, some physicians are prescribing cannabis quite liberally. Because I work in substance use disorders, I tend to be more conservative because I see a lot of the harms and the negative impact on mood that a lot of people experience. And if you really, if you look at the evidence, there have been some great reviews recently, and our best journals that show that there's really no evidence for improvement in any mental health issue with cannabis. So, there could be an exception. So I would never tell somebody that their story of feeling better with cannabis was true, but that would be more of an exception. That generally we see that symptoms worsen and mental health conditions worsen with cannabis. As I mentioned earlier, it's on the rise. So adolescent use, they're using more edibles, so that's increasing, and also vaping of cannabis. So other substances we haven't talked about yet, which I'm not really going to get into, but certainly we can in the question period. Stimulants, so cocaine, crack, and crystal meth. So crystal meth, we're seeing so much in Toronto, and we're very worried about that and trying to find ways to help people that are getting stuck in that. And one of the reasons is it's very cheap right now. So it's just inexpensive and quite dangerous. And then opioids. So I do welcome any questions about opioids, because we're certainly in an opioid epidemic. I see Rabbi Goodman. Is my time up?
I'm just the gentle, sorry, time's up. We have some wonderful questions, so I'm going to invite Shelley back on screen so we can get to the question and answer period. Thank you so much for your expertise.
And I'm done. No, that's great.
Okay.
Thank you so much for all that wonderful information. And I know there's not enough time to tell us everything about addiction in the short time you've had, but we did have a few questions I want to go through. We had a question wondering why there are differences between men and women in low-risk drinking guidelines.
That's such a great question. So, women and men metabolize alcohol differently. And part of it is weight. So, men often weigh more than women just because their size is different. But it's not just that. So even if we are the same weight as a male, the females just won't process it as quickly. And part of it has to do, with percentage of water that we hold. So, definitely we get intoxicated easier, and then we get health problems related to our substance use much quicker.
Thank you. Are you willing? We've got a few questions as to whether you would be willing to share your slides with the attendees. I don't know if that's something you would consider.
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Absolutely.
So I've heard from the temple, and they're willing to circulate it to everybody who's registered. So thank you so much on that. Another question is, how can families best intervene and help? If you know that a member has got an issue, what can you do?
So, I think it comes in stages. So the first stage is to check in with someone to see if they're worried, right? So that could be a conversation. It's good to start with the word I, so, I've noticed that alcohol is sort of increasing if it's someone, let's say, in your household. And I'm just wondering if you're worried about it. What do you think? So it's asking them, they're the expert on them. So that's sort of stage one, that conversation. And then let's say there really is a problem and it's affecting other people. Then you can go to that next stage and again, using an I statement and saying, I'm experiencing negative things because of your drinking. I think it would be really helpful to have a conversation about that. And of course you can be, absolutely supportive and helpful, and being able to guide someone to treatment will make a huge difference. And then the third stage, if things don't happen and things get difficult, let's say it's a marriage, then it might be time to get some counseling. around that to try to help sort through.
Thank you. Randy, I've got a question for you, so maybe you can come back on the screen. Okay. Question about how you deal with a situation when your family members might be drinking or smoking drugs. Does it trigger you? What do you say to them? How do you find that situation?
I've been in situations where not only family members, but in social settings. My girlfriend has a cottage, for instance, and when we're on the dock and everybody's there, they're drinking beer or smoking weed or whatever. And my rationalization is that this is my problem. It's not their problem. So, and I have, like I said earlier on, I make the choice if I want to be a hopeless dope addict or a dopeless hope addict. And I know for a fact, don't get me wrong, after 17 years, I still would like to sit around a fireplace and have a Bailey's on ice. But I know what would happen. It's like when somebody goes on a diet and they lose 100 pounds. You have one piece of chocolate cake, you put on 300 pounds.
We know that well. We know that well. Another question I'm wondering to both of you, how could Holy Blossom Temple be of most help for people suffering from this kind of issue? How can a synagogue help?
Well, you go first, Randy.
During Zoom, it's hard to have face-to-face, but have avenues of information open to everybody. Put them in contact with whether it's a doctor or Jax. I mean, Jax, I'm an advocate of Jax. I believe in them with every ounce of my body because I've seen it in action. They have a Thursday night meeting, for instance, that not everybody knows about. It's for families of addicts and alcoholics. And when and I go there as an addict, but if a family goes there, like say a husband and wife is going there about their son, for instance, well, they hear another husband and wife talking about their son or daughter. So you realize that you're not the only one. You're not unique in this situation. So the best thing for Holy Blossom or anybody else to do is to let people get informed about how much help there is out there. Because if somebody genuinely wants help, whether it's the addict or the family of the addict, when I say addict, I mean addict or alcoholic, then they need to know where the help is and how they can get to it.
Thank you. Leslie, anything?
I think I would say, what you're doing tonight and, hearing Randy today, like what an opening, opening the door for people to connect with him and knowing that Jax is there and, just, presenting in such a positive light, what help looks like.
Thank you. And one more question. I guess we've got time for another question. How do you talk to your kids about substance use at an early age? Suppose you don't think there is a problem, but you're trying to be helpful in guiding them in their right direction. What would you folks suggest? I didn't say they'd be easy.
What I would suggest is let them speak to somebody like me. Quite honestly, my dream is to take this to another level. I would like to go on a speaking circuit to high schools, junior high schools, and let them know that the effects that drugs have on people, because everybody says, like I said earlier on, like my drug of choice was marijuana. And I told myself, it's only weed, it's only weed. Well, at the end of my addiction, only weed was $1,200 every month. That's a mortgage payment.
And I might just add, I went into my son's grade 7 classroom last year to talk. And one of the things I found in my research was just being careful with the age. So certainly public health messages should be targeted at the right age. So sometimes we spoke about vaping in grade 7, which I think is appropriate, and maybe even alcohol and maybe even marijuana. And then as kids get older, mentioning other substances. And, a couple of tips when I think about my kids getting older and friends' kids is, just never take a pill. You don't know what's in it. Usually those are the worst substances and really it's not something that somebody buys at a store. It's not monitored. And then, other research shows that communication in a family. So talking with kids about the stresses that they face, you know, maybe even talking, we know that teens are drinking and smoking weed. So maybe just talking about that experience and what it's like for them, and if it's stressful and how things are hard, and always being available for that pickup to, you know, help somebody exit.
Wonderful. And there's a lot of comments coming into the chat that we really should be going into the schools, that Randy should be speaking to the schools. And I was struck by the information in your slide that said how low the nicotine use was. I think it was 15%. And that was certainly public health messaging and going into the schools. So that hopefully that's a good way. I don't want to keep people too long, so I want to draw this to a close. I so much want to thank you. I see your girlfriend in the background, Randy and Leslie. It's been a wonderful, wonderful evening full of honesty and frankness and information that we can all use. We are thrilled that you're speaking with us and opening up the area of addictions and offering ways that people can be helped. We've made a donation through the committee in each of your honors to the Luke Sklar Mental Health Initiative because we are grateful. I also want to thank our generous sponsors for this evening, Jill Whitkin and Greg Coleman. We will be emailing an evaluation of the program to all of you who registered. Please take a few moments to fill it out. We intend to do a lot more seminars and go forward. So please let us know your comments. Our next program, which is coming up soon in the winter, is on dementia and its impact on families. So check the Holy Blossom Bulletin or check the Facebook page and that will come out. And I personally want to acknowledge that I think, as you've mentioned, Leslie, COVID is a difficult time for all. It's especially difficult if you're dealing with addictions. And so I would encourage people to reach out to family, friends, to clergy at any synagogue or church you're involved in, and to feel free to use professionals. There'll be a slide at the end that will reiterate the information about JACS. And Randy has mentioned that he's willing to help anybody, and there's an email address. So I really want to thank you for coming tonight. And thanks to all the participants. It's been wonderful to have you, and I wish everybody a good evening. Take care.
Thanks, Shelley.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I want to read all the comments. I forgot.